What if I told you that one of the most devastating mass murders in royal history did unfold on a battlefield, but at a wedding? A celebration meant to unite two powerful houses in an atmosphere of hope and peace turned into a nightmare. The air was festive, wine flowed freely, and the banquet tables were adorned with lavish dishes. Yet beneath the elegance and grandeur lay a deadly plan set in motion. As the guests raised their glasses to toast the future, they unwittingly drank their doom. Within hours, nobles began to collapse, and screams echoed through the stone hall. Physicians were rendered helpless against an unseen enemy. What started as a joyous occasion devolved into absolute chaos, an event that would reverberate through centuries of royal paranoia. This is the story of the poisoned wedding feast that eradicated an entire royal bloodline. And it's every bit as chilling as it sounds. The prelude to tragedy, our tale begins in 14th century Europe, a time when power could wield a sword or be served at a table. The deadly event unfolded amid the power struggles between two noble houses, the House of Trastamara and the House of Burgundy. While the Trastamaras were rapidly rising in influence in the Iberian Peninsula, the Burgundians exercised control over parts of France and the Low Countries. The marriage of young Princess Isabella of Castile to Duke Philip of Burgundy's son, Prince Thierry, was orchestrated to end years of tension and conflict. This union promised a rare spark of peace in an age steeped in betrayal. As preparations ramped up, chroniclers of the time described walls draped in silks, orchestras playing jubilantly, and massive feasts served on silver platters. Over 400 noble guests from across Europe gathered at the Grand Ducal Palace in Dijon, blissfully unaware that many would never leave. The stakes were enormous. Uniting the Trastamaras with the Burgundians would consolidate vast territories and realign the power dynamics of Western Europe, an event scrutinized by popes, kings, and enemies alike. However, as celebrations commenced, the seeds of doom had already been sown. A web of betrayal and treachery grievances simmered beneath the festivity. Isabella's father, King Peter of Castile, known to some as Peter the Cruel and to others as Peter the Just, had many enemies, particularly within his own bloodline. His half-brother, Henry of Trastamara, had long harbored ambitions for power. He viewed the marriage alliance as a betrayal of Castilian interests and was infamous for executing anyone who opposed him, including some siblings. It was rumored he had sinister intentions regarding this wedding. In the early days of the 14th century, poison had become a favored weapon of the elite. Unlike daggers or armies, it left no fingerprints, only corpses and lingering questions. Someone present at the feast understood this chilling reality all too well. During the final night of a week-long celebration, as guests indulged in the richest foods and finest wines, a subtle yet lethal dose of poison was slipped into multiple dishes. Remarkably, the poison was not aimed at one individual but intended to eradicate an entire bloodline in one fell swoop. The night of horror. Survivors would later paint a horrifying picture of that night. Guests, after toasting and taking part in their last course, an extravagant dessert of candied fruits and sweet Sicilian wine, began to experience symptoms of poisoning. First came waves of nausea, followed by vomit and dizziness. Within hours, dozens of noblemen and women collapsed onto the cold marble floors of the palace. What had once been a hall filled with music and laughter morphed into a makeshift field hospital and ultimately a morgue. Physicians, powerless against what they described as a death that spread like wildfire, could only observe as the poison coursed through their victims. The bride, Princess Isabella, succumbed within 3 hours. Her new husband, Prince Thierry, lingered until dawn before fading away. The royal bloodline they were meant to perpetuate extinguished before it even began. But who could be responsible for such heinous actions? Theories and suspicions swirled almost immediately. Some blamed a disgruntled court cook dismissed months before the wedding for alleged theft. Others pointed fingers at agents from rival kingdoms of Navarre and Aragon, both fearful of a potential Trastamara-Burgundy alliance. Yet the most damning suspicions landed on Henry of Trastamara himself. Many historians argue that he orchestrated the entire affair, fearing that Isabella's progeny could threaten his claim to the throne. To him, Poisoning his own niece's wedding may have seemed merely another day's grim task. The aftermath. A shattered royal world, the massacre sent shockwaves across Europe. Beyond the immediate horror of the event, the political ramifications were vast. The Burgundian court, humiliated and bereaved, withdrew support from future Castilian endeavors. Several noble families lost their heirs, and in some cases, entire houses found themselves without male successors. Power dynamics shifted overnight as rival factions exploited the sudden vacuum, plunging parts of France and Spain into chaos. In the immediate aftermath, the ducal palace, where the tragedy unfolded, remained abandoned for over a decade. The locals whispered that it was cursed and haunted by the spirits of the slain. Tales emerged that the banquet hall still echoed with a distant combination of laughter and screams. Whether rooted in legend or reality, the haunting political sentiments were all too genuine. Years passed and monarchs across Europe instituted new security protocols for court banquets. Food tasters became mandatory, and kitchens were tightly monitored like fortresses. The term wedding feast, once inconspicuous, took on a sinister connotation. Intriguingly, no official solution to the massacre was ever reached. No one was arrested. No public trials were held. The deaths were classified as unfortunate illnesses, a transparent euphemism that deceived no one. Chroniclers, particularly those under the Church's protection, dared not name names, but later records, letters, and diaries hinted at a widespread belief that the event was deliberate. One Castilian noble inscribed in his journal, "The devil drank among us that night, and he wore the face of kin." Silent legacy of a gruesome event. Shocking as it may be, history has quickly buried this incident, rendering it obscure when compared to well-known massacres like the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre or the Black Dinner of Scotland. Why? Simply put, it was too embarrassing, too destabilizing, and far too incriminating of those who would go on to rule kingdoms. The tragedy of Isabella and Thierry extends beyond the tragic loss of two young lives. It illustrates how power, paranoia, and ambition convert celebrations into slaughter. This harrowing episode serves as a stark reminder that in the royal courts of Europe, even sacred institutions like marriage could morph into weapons of political warfare. The poisoned wedding feast represented not merely an act of murder, but a calculated erasure of a future that posed a threat to another present. Even centuries later, the shadows of that fateful night linger. Within the foundations of modern diplomacy, the echoes of that deadly toast persist. A kingdom's grief and the pursuit of justice. Following the poisoned feast, the grand palace at Dijon fell into ghostly silence. Tapestries hung untouched and banquet tables sat half-cleared. The halls that once echoed with jubilant music now whispered betrayal, murder, and a future ripped asunder before it could begin. Messengers dispatched to every corner of Europe delivered grim reports instead of wedding invitations to monarchs who had sent envoys. Grief swiftly transformed into fear as people questioned the safety of their own alliances. If one royal house could be undone in a single night, what of the others? Back in Castile, King Henry of Trastamara's court attempted to spin the narrative as a freak illness, a sudden pestilence that had afflicted the revelry. For the politically naive, this explanation might have sufficed. After all, plagues were not uncommon in medieval Europe. A banquet of that scale could easily become a breeding ground for disease. However, anyone familiar with Iberian and Burgundian court intrigues saw through the feeble veil of deception. Notably, no servants, cooks, musicians, or guards perished, only the nobles, the elite, the ones who mattered. It did not take long for rumors to swirl regarding potential agents of the attack. Among the initial suspects was a minor courtier named Martina Lees Duniga, famed for his checkered past and a propensity for bribery. He had served both the Castilian and Aragonese courts and had been seen speaking privately with food suppliers just days before the wedding. Some suggested that he had received a significant payment from an unknown party just weeks prior. However, Martina vanished the night of the feast, and his body was never found. Some believed he fled to Italy. Others suspected he had been silenced by those who hired him. The intrigue deepened with the sudden death of Gomdouves, the chief steward of the palace, discovered hanging in his quarters 2 days after the massacre. Initially ruled a suicide, supposedly attributed to guilt, whispers quickly emerged suggesting that he had planned to reveal his knowledge about discrepancies in the wine storage and had been visited by armed men the night before his demise. Conveniently, he took the truth with him to the grave. Meanwhile, the Burgundian Duke, Philip the Bold, was livid with grief and outrage. The murder of his son and the stain upon his court honor were wounds he could neither overlook nor forget. However, his position was delicate. He could not readily accuse the King of Castile without evidence, nor could he risk open warfare. Instead, he turned to the darker tools of diplomacy, spies, informants, and political pressure. Conspiracies and suspicions within months, his agents infiltrated the Castilian court, gathering whispers like precious gold. Their findings only deepened the wounds. Reports indicated that King Henry had held a secret council 3 weeks before the wedding, featuring his most ruthless advisor, Sancho Disma, a man infamously known as the King's Knife. Sancho had gained notoriety not through noble lineage or royal favor, but through sheer brutality, having orchestrated multiple assassinations during Henry's rise to power. Witnesses claim that during this clandestine assembly, Henry expressed his fears that Isabella's marriage could fortify a Burgundian claim to his own throne, especially if she bore sons. "I will not see my bloodline erased by her womb," he reportedly said. Whether this line is apocryphal or not, it spread like wildfire among the knowledgeable elite. Yet Henry was not alone in motive. Several factions within the French court perceived the marriage as a significant threat. Though technically under the French crown, Burgundy had long operated as an independent power, and its burgeoning alliance with the Iberian kingdoms threatened French influence. Charles V of France, while publicly silent, was rumored to have tacitly approved any measure to keep Burgundy in check. Could a multi-kingdom conspiracy have converged, a calculated agreement between adversaries to allow one bloody night to preserve the status quo? Then there was Aragon. The crown of Aragon had been at odds with Castile for ages, making the new union between Castile and Burgundy pose a significant threat to their interests. King Peter IV of Aragon, known for his cunning diplomacy, was deeply concerned about the wedding. Though no direct links between Aragon and the poisoning were ever proven, later court documents suggested that Peter's agents closely monitored the preparations. Was it surveillance or sabotage? History leaves the question suspended in ambiguity. With no identifiable perpetrator or public reckoning, the families of the victims languished in a void of justice. The bride's mother, Queen Blanca of Navarre, retreated into seclusion, taking vows of silence and joining a distant monastery. There, it is said, she prayed daily at a shrine made from Isabella's childhood toys, a haunting symbol of what had been lost. Meanwhile, Philip the Bold commissioned tapestries and paintings to memorialize his son, featuring hidden symbol skulls behind goblets and serpents coiling in the shape of crowns. These artworks, while breathtaking, were laden with accusation. Art transformed into protest, a legacy of fear and caution. Beyond grief and a thirst for vengeance, the poisoned wedding feast yielded another subtler consequence. It fundamentally reshaped perceptions surrounding royal marriages. They transcended their roles as mere political tools. They became political vulnerabilities. Every invitation, menu, and guest list became an issue of statecraft. Noble families hired personal chefs and food tasters, while courtly protocols underwent a transformation in how they hosted foreign dignitaries. Perhaps most significantly, the idea of a safe alliance became obsolete. If bloodlines could be obliterated at the dinner table, then no union was sacred. In the years that followed, survivors of the massacre emerged as cautionary tales. Lady Agna Durbong, a distant cousin of the bride, survived by refusing the final course due to a bad taste, her story becoming legend within the Bourbon family, who later rose to power in France. Known as La Miracle, the miraculous one, she dedicated the rest of her life to funding hospitals and orphanages, forever marked by the horrors she had witnessed. Conversely, Lord Etienne d'Isalong attended the wedding with his 2 sons, only to lose both to the poison. Consumed by guilt, he abandoned politics to join the Knights Hospitaller, immersing himself in military campaigns in the Holy Land, ultimately dying in battle 7 years later, a penitent warrior rather than a courtier. His letters, archived in Avignon, hauntingly capture the essence of that wedding. We danced with death that night, and he smiled from every candle. Theological implications and historical silence. Interestingly, the poisoning bore theological implications as well. The Church, eager to maintain the veneer of divine order, grappled to explain how such malevolence could occur during a sacred celebration. Some preachers denounced the massacre as divine punishment for the noble's arrogance. Others whispered that the devil had sullied the court. Perhaps the most harrowing aspect is how swiftly this incident was suppressed in the annals of history. While infamous massacres like the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre or Scotland's Black Dinner remain prominent in historical consciousness, this poisoned feast is remarkably obscure, nearly erased from official chronicles. Why? Because it was too embarrassing, too destabilizing, and implicated notable figures who would go on to rule vast kingdoms. This act of poison wasn't just murder. It was a calculated erasure of a future threatening someone else's grip on power. Despite the passage of centuries, the shadows of that fateful night linger in the foundations of modern diplomacy. Conclusion: remembering the forgotten. Today we remember what they tried to forget. In the days following the poisoned feast, the Grand Palace at Dijon endured a silence thick with foreboding. The tapestries remained, the banquet tables half cleared, yet music echoed no more. Instead, whispers of betrayal and murder swirled through empty halls. As messengers traveled throughout Europe, the grim reports reached monarchs who had previously sent envoys to attend the wedding. Instead of celebratory announcements, they received news of tragedy. As grief morphed into panic, the realization dawned that if one royal family could be undone in a single night, so too could others. As we explore this dark chapter of history, we recognize the weight of the personal, moral, and political dimensions of this tragedy. The poisoned wedding feast served as a poignant reminder of the perils of ambition, distrust, and ambition in the courts of power, where even the most sacred institutions can morph into instruments of political warfare. Indeed, the memories of Isabella and Thierry may have faded from the official record, but they resonate as powerful cautionary tales about betrayal, paranoia, and the fragile nature of trust. The echoes of that deadly toast endure, reminding us that history is often written not just by the victors, but also by those brave enough to dig through shadows and uncover truths buried beneath centuries of silence. Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell to support our work. Never miss an upload. Like this vid, drop a comment and share it with others to help us grow this historical community.